Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wild crafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest, absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, southernappalachianherbs@blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs. Hey y'all, welcome to this week's show. Wow, it has been quite a week. As you may remember, last week I launched my new book, Herbal Medicine for Preppers, Homesteaders, and Permaculture People. And the reception has just been incredible, in spite of the fact that the rollout did not exactly go off without a hitch. For the first 24 hours plus, I'm going to say the first day to a day and a half, PayPal was not processing orders. People would buy the book, believing they had purchased it. PayPal would not take the money from their account or their card and would not send me notification that the book had been sold. So who knows how many sales I lost in that first day. If you happen to be one of those people that thought you bought the book and did not receive a receipt of your purchase and have not received the book, you can double check. PayPal did not bill your account, no problem. Please try to purchase it again. Hopefully you've already found this and already tried to purchase it again, but it's no problem. It was just a hiccup with PayPal. We got that straightened out. There was also a problem with the file of the print book. It did not show the page numbers for the chapters. That was corrected very quickly. Very few people had purchased the book from Amazon at that time. If you are one of those people that did purchase a paperback, please send me a message, southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com, and I will send you a free ebook so that you will have that as a reference and you can write in the page numbers by the chapters, and you'll also have the electronic reference if you want it. So there were minor hiccups. What's really great has been the feedback, the reviews people are giving. I'm just really honored and pleased that people so well received this work, this book. This was written by a lady who bought the ebook. She says, and at first I thought this was going to be a complaint, right? So I love it when messages start this way. She said, "This is incorrectly titled. It is so much more than just herbal medicine. It is a lifestyle book." So that's pretty nice, isn't it? She says, "I'm in agreement with many of the things you brought up." She says, "Sugar will be the death of us. We have been so accustomed to the taste of sweet that we turn up our noses at the bitters of our ancestors were consuming, not just as bitters from a bottle, but bitter foods such as dandelion, arugula, radicchio, and artichoke, Brussels sprouts, cranberries, etc." She points out that chocolate is a little bitter and has a little sugar, and that's a good compromise. And I, of course, agree with that. I do love my chocolate. And that coffee is, well, black coffee is quite bitter, and if you don't put too much sugar in it, it continues to be. So we can enjoy our coffee and our dark chocolate, preferably. She says, "You mentioned using herbs that are local to us, and I use those as well as some that I have to buy, such as ginger and turmeric and other plants that don't grow here, but I do prefer those same properties in local plants if I can. Local plants have their roots in the same soil that we do. They drink the same water and breathe the same air. We are more energetically in tune with local medicines. Regardless of where we live, there is generally enough of a variety of plants so we can find all our needs in our immediate areas. If not in all native plants, then we can grow the remainder." That's true. I mean, even, turmeric and ginger, you can grow that as a house plant, and I talk about that in the book. You can have it out in the summertime, and when it starts getting too cool for it, just bring it inside. If you have a greenhouse, of course, you can do that as well. She says, learning to live more simply in harmony with the world instead of just building bigger houses on top of the highest hills is something we should all be striving for. Great job. I'm sure this book will have value for everyone, regardless of what level of homesteading or permaculture they are at. Put that in context, that message came from a lady who is a professional herbalist and has a list of credentials that would take me half the show to list. So that was pretty nice. And another example, he says, I got it now and was looking through it. There is so much great first aid content. I've been collecting natural first aid books, and this one is definitely a good one to add. It's as good as Be Your Own Doctor by Rachel Weaver. It's a gem. At this point, I can see it definitely adds a lot to that book, which has been our standard recently. I haven't read enough to fully review it, but I can already see that for the times when we want to minimize doctor and hospital visits, which for some of us is all the time, this book with all its solutions for herbal healing will be invaluable, plus lots of general health advice. This was definitely $10 well spent. When we have a sickness in the family, we're always grateful for all the expert input we can get. So those are just two examples of folks who bought the book, and I am just so pleased to get that feedback. And now let's get into the meat of the show. I told you we'd start doing things just a little bit differently. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an excerpt from the book on a first aid topic, and then we'll get into our plant identification. So I'm giving you uh, a lot of information here. So of course I lead off the first aid section. Probably the most important first aid topic, or one of the most important, is bleeding. Because as Doc Jones always says, if you don't stop the bleeding, not much else you do is going to matter. And I tell a story that if you've listened to my podcast a lot, you've heard me mention before. And that just kind of leads us into this topic. And I'm going to start giving you a list of herbs and how to use them to stop bleeding. So several herbs can be very effective in staunching or stopping bleeding. About this time last year, I bought a washing machine for my mother and delivered it to her house and hooked it up. I had no help, but I had my pickup truck and a dolly, and I thought I was set. So as I lugged it up the stairs into the house, it suddenly overbalanced and the dolly kicked back on me. A sharp edge of the metal hit my shin with enough force to fracture the bone and split the skin. Being a stubborn guy, I just kept going. By the time I had the machine all hooked up, my jeans, sock, and shoe were soaked with blood, and my leg had swollen. Only then did I realize this was not a minor injury. I was stuck, hours away from my home in the mountains, with none of the herbs I needed on hand. First, I did basic traditional first aid. I washed the area and disinfected the wound with rubbing alcohol. Then I bandaged it, elevated the leg, and applied an ice pack. Gradually, the bleeding slowed, but it didn't totally stop. On day two, it would still begin to bleed again anytime I lowered the leg, stood, and walked on it. I would stop the bleeding with pressure, but I had a problem. I had no butterfly bandages or duct tape or super glue, and the last are fairly unpleasant, emergency only techniques anyway. I had to find an herb to stop the bleeding. After checking the kitchen and scouting the yard, not being able to go far, and not seeing anything I would normally use, suddenly it hit me. I was in the sandhills of North Carolina near Fayetteville. I was surrounded by pine trees. I soon found a wounded tree and scraped off some pine pitch with my knife. Always carry a knife, of course. After cleaning the wound again, I pulverized the dried pitch into a powder and rubbed it into the wound. The bleeding slowed and stopped within minutes. Covered that with some fresher, gummier pitch and then bandaged it. The bleeding totally stopped and the wound closed. The swelling went down. The fracture was slight and healed up on its own. My leg healed very quickly, did not become infected, and now I barely have a faint scar. So why was pine so effective? Pine pitch is a styptic. That means it stops bleeding. When dry, it becomes very fine, sticky powder that helps blood coagulate. Pine is astringent. It shrinks tissue. It can also shrink capillaries and reduce swelling. Pine is disinfectant, which is why pine sol is used as a cleaner. Historically, pine extracts, oils, and turpentine were widely used in medicine. A soak or bath made from pine needles or pine pitch or the inner bark can reduce swelling, ease pains from bruises, sprains, and swollen joints, and soothe a sunburn. A tea of pine needles is excellent for a sore throat. I will mention pine several times in this book, but what other herbs could I have used? Usually, the quickest and most effective herb to stop bleeding that is easily at hand is cayenne pepper. Yes, cayenne pepper that you would grab from a kitchen cabinet. And yes, it will burn. However, cayenne is also an excellent styptic that quickly stops bleeding from minor cuts. It also slows or staunches bleeding in serious wounds. An additional benefit of cayenne has been mentioned by Dr. Patrick Jones, who uses herbs in his veterinary practice. Doc Jones, as his students call him, myself included, uses cayenne not only as a primary treatment to stop bleeding, but keeps a cayenne tincture on hand for shock. He often gives the example of a dog that has been hit by a car. Its gums are pale, respiration shallow, and eyes are dull. The dog is fading fast. A quick shot of cayenne tincture at the back of the throat immediately brings the dog back from the brink of death. Cayenne is useful both internally, taken as a tincture, or externally used powdered. Whereas nearly everyone has a pine tree near their home and can use that for emergency medicines, cayenne pepper is something you need to buy and keep on hand, at least in two forms. A liniment of cayenne is also useful for joint and muscle pain. More on that later. A jar of it costs about $1 at a dollar store. This one is cheap and easy. Another styptic that you may be able to find, depending on the time of year, was commonly used by the old mountain folks. It is puffball mushrooms. When puffballs are past their edible stage, they dry and open to puff out millions of spores as their means of reproduction. Like finely powdered pine pitch and finely ground cayenne pepper, these spores help blood coagulate to stop bleeding. The only real downside of using puffballs is that the spores will make the wound turn a disturbing black color. While this is harmless, it will terrify emergency medical staff. So, if you end up using puffballs in an emergency and are being treated by paramedics, be sure to tell them you use puffballs to stop bleeding before they try to amputate anything. If you're in danger of losing consciousness, you may want to write on the limb or area with a pen. Dried puffball mushrooms keep for years, so you don't have to wait until you're wounded to go crawling around hoping to find puffballs. Gather them in the right season for future use. Finely powdered oak bark can be used similarly. Not only can the powdered bark act as a styptic, but oak is extremely astringent. The astringency can help shrink capillaries and close the wound. Shepherd's purse, that's our green herbs, it's Capsella. It's actually in the mustard family we've talked about before. This member of the mustard family is recognizable for its oddly shaped seed pods. They look like small purses, or they're slightly heart-shaped. Shepherd's purse is both taken internally as a tincture or externally used powdered. Shepherd's purse has a long history of use to reduce excess uterine bleeding. Yarrow. Yarrow is an herb most traditionally used for bleeding. According to legend, Achilles used yarrow to staunch the bleeding of soldiers wounded in battle. Yarrow is useful both internally taken as a tincture or externally used powdered. Along with shepherd's purse, yarrow was an herb commonly carried into battle by soldiers from ancient times even into World War I. Yarrow is also effective for nosebleeds. Another herb that soldiers once carried is bugle. Bugle, known by its Old English name, allheal. That's a Jugo reptans, by the way. Bugle is a small herb in the mint family, considered a weed in most places. The astringent quality of this herb makes it useful taken internally for hemorrhages. A plaster of the fresh plant or an ointment was used for external wounds. Bugle's other useful properties include its bitterness, that is good for liver inflammation, and a uniquely sedative cardiotonic effect. The flowering stalk of this plant, tincture or eaten fresh, slows the heart rate and is very calming. This quality makes it an especially useful herb for stressful first aid situations. Plantain, as mentioned before, is excellent for wounds. And as mentioned before, as the previous chapter I was talking about using it as a poultice. It is astringent and quickly staunches bleeding while promoting healing. Arnica, that's Arnica montana, should generally not be used internally except under proper guidance from a qualified herbalist. Used externally, arnica reduces inflammation and helps stop bleeding while increasing local blood supply. As a homeopathic remedy, arnica is quite effective against internal bleeding and all manners of injury and shock. Agrimony is strongly astringent. It's an herb that is very useful to stop bleeding. The entire plant may be used as a tea or a wash or applied as a poultice. Powdered lady's mantle may be used externally as a styptic, but used internally, it stimulates menstrual flow. Speedwell. Speedwell is an herb that isn't much used these days, but its Latin name, Veronica officinalis, indicates that it was included in the medical dispensary and considered an important herb in the area of monastic medicine. Speedwell is astringent and useful for bleeding. Dead nettle. Dead nettle is another of those weeds most people complain about in their lawns. It's astringent and is useful taken as a tea or tincture for internal bleeding and to reduce menstrual flow. Externally, it may also be used as a styptic. Great burnet is a strongly astringent herb. A decoction or tincture of the root is one of the most effective herbs for internal bleeding. Tormental, that's Potentilla erecta, may be used similarly and is even called bloodroot in German folk medicine, not to be confused with American bloodroot, which is sanguinaria, a member of the popper family. That one has a red sap, but tormental is totally different. All potentillas or cinquefoils may be used similarly. You may remember a few weeks ago we talked about the rose family of astringents. Michael Moore used to say yet another rose family astringent. Well, that's your potentillas, your cinquefoils, your tormentals. Very astringent. They just kind of shrink those capillaries. Also in German folk medicine, horsetail, that's equisetum, is considered uniquely irreplaceable and invaluable for bleeding and spitting of blood, for foul wounds, and even cancerous growths and ulcerated legs. That's according to Father Nate. Horsetail is also recommended by Father Kunzel. He said this plant taken internally as a tea will stop the strongest hemorrhaging and vomiting of blood in a short time, yes, almost immediately. That's just one of the many reasons we need to be growing our own horsetail. And I say that because horsetail often grows in what we would call waste areas, contaminated areas, and it has a unique ability to draw those toxins up into itself. And while it's good to use to help remediate land that's been contaminated, makes it a little dangerous for us to use a lot of the wild horsetail we might find herbally. Until and unless we get our waterways cleaned up, you're probably better off growing your horsetail at home. Again, that's equisetum. It's an incredibly effective herb, not just for wounds. It's the best natural source of silica. It's good for your joints. It's good for your teeth, your hair. I mean, it's good for all kinds of stuff. So keep that in mind. Now, wild calla, the dried root, has a history of use as a tea or poultice for bleeding and swelling. Buckbean is another very astringent herb that can be used to stop bleeding. Bearberry is uva ursi. Okay, this one is got such a long history of use by Native Americans as an herb to stop excessive menstrual bleeding, hemorrhaging, and such. And it's strongly astringent and may be used for bleeding. Giant bird's nest is don't understand at all how this plant got this name. It's another one of our weedy type herbs. You'll find it kind of by the roadside or the edge of woods. It's a great herb. It's again very astringent. I state in the book, of course, it's a plant, not an actual bird's nest, of course. Though I believe certain swallows' nests have been used as both food and medicine in China, which I have never tried because, well, the thought of eating a bird's nest made from regurgitated bird spit. That's actually how swallows make their nests. They chew stuff up, puke it out, and turn it into a nest. Um, it kind of disgusts me, honestly. So that's as much as I love Chinese food, I'm not quite ready to go that far. This plant is useful for bleeding. The stems and fruit may be used as a tea or pounded into a fine powder to be used as a styptic for nosebleeds. False Solomon seal has been used externally for bleeding and skin irritations. Wild indigo or cream wild indigo, this is Baptisia. They are astringent and antiseptic when used externally as a wash or a poultice. Indigo was a very useful medicinal herb long before it was discovered to be a clothing dye, a nice blue dye. It was actually a lady in South Carolina, if I remember correctly, she was the granddaughter of one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence that discovered that indigo could make a beautiful blue dye, and it became one of America's first exports. But long before then, it was used as a medicinal herb. Queen of the Prairie is in the rose family. That's one of our yarfas. It is an astringent herb that can be used to stop or slow bleeding due to its high tannin content. You can use it just like potentilla. Pennsylvania smartweed. Now this is Polygonum. We discussed this one a few weeks back. This is in the buckwheat family. Again, smartweed, very common weed that most people really want to get rid of. So no one's going to complain if you harvest their smartweed. And it can be used interchangeably with common smartweeds. The smartweeds are interchangeable. And the name polygonum basically means knees. And if you ever look at these plants, they grow with these joints that look like little swollen knees. That's kind of how you identify your polygonums. It's often known as bitter leaf. The tea has been used for mouth bleeding. A tea of common smartweed is used for internal bleeding and hemorrhages. Salad burnet is an interesting herb. This is one that may be a weed, but it used to be a pretty common culinary herb. You still see it in a lot of old recipes, but it's another one that's also known as a soldier's herb. It was one of the herbs that soldiers would carry into battle. The tea is strongly astringent and can be used topically to stop bleeding. It was used during the American Revolution, taken internally by soldiers before battle to prevent bleeding from battle wounds. Few people realize just how brutal the Revolutionary War was, with muskets and cannonballs in horrific conditions. Anything my ancestors who fought for our freedom valued, so do I. This is also an herb in the rose family, which is why many herbalists prefer such herb as Yarfus, yet another rose family astringent. Purple loosestrife is generally considered to be an invasive weed. I know they have had loosestrife eradication programs in many parts of this country. They're particularly pesky around ponds and such. But it's also a very useful herb. Used externally, it stops bleeding and is antibacterial. Ironweed. This one grows in a lot of ditches. It's very common around here. The stems are astringent, can be used to stop bleeding. In that case, you want to mash them up and use it like a poultice. Alum root. Alum root is more often, I think, grown as an ornamental these days. So you want to look for it in your landscape or other people's landscapes. Alum root, as the name implies, is incredibly astringent. You know, if you've ever used alum in making pickles or canning, just a little bit of that on your tongue would just make your mouth draw up and pucker like an unripe persimmon. Alum root can be used as a styptic because it is so astringent it closes up those capillaries. Amaranth, which is one of our most common roadside and meadow herbs, weeds, I should say, and a very popular grain these days, especially among the granola eating health food types. It's actually quite delicious. I enjoy amaranth. The greens are really good, and the seeds are good too. I like to take the seeds and mix them in with some bread or cookies. Just give them a little more fiber and a little more protein, really, so that if I eat one in the morning, it doesn't really spike my blood sugar as much and keeps me feeling full longer. So I like to have stuff like that before I go on a hike. Amaranth is one of the many herbs that can be called pigweed. It is an excellent forage plant for food. Amaranth can also be used as an astringent to stop bleeding. Elderberry. Yeah, elderberry that everybody's crazy about right now for the syrup from the berries because it has antiviral properties. Elderberry herbs, elderberry leaves can be used to stop bleeding. Staghorn sumac. Now, this one is coming into berry right now. If you go out and look around, you'll see the long horn-shaped bunches of red berries. The root, bark, or tea is astringent and may be used to stop bleeding. Buttonbush, bark tea can be used to stop bleeding. Hemlock, this is the tree, suga, not poison hemlock, which they used to, kill Socrates. This is actual hemlock tree or bush. Uh, Herbalists usually call it tsuga, which is the Latin name, Tsuga, just to kind of differentiate so people don't get confused. Actual poison hemlock is in the wild parsley family, so you can't really confuse anything but the name. A tea made from the needles and stems is good to stop bleeding. Kentucky coffee tree, root bark actually can be used to stop bleeding, also as a tea. Yucca. Now, yucca is a plant I have a love-hate relationship with because my grandfather planted a lot of them at the house. And when I would cut the grass, I would often get poked by yucca plants. But it is such a useful plant. I mean, anybody that's into survival skills will tell you you can take the fibers from the leaves and you can make a cordage out of it. It has a lot of good uses. The flowers are edible. But in this case, um, well, as I say, yucca is a plant that causes much bleeding. The common variety of yucca plant around here is soapweed. Now, soapweed gets that name because the root can be used to make a soap. It causes foaming. But it also can be used to stop bleeding and as a poultice for sprains, even broken bones. In that case, you're going to take the root, the fresh root, cut it up fine or grate it, and then you can put it on as a poultice. You can actually use it to poison fish as well. Totally illegal, but in a survival situation, you would take that grated root and go to say like a pond or a small area where there's not a lot of water flow and get it in there and get the suds in there, and it'll actually interfere with the fish's gills to absorb oxygen from the water. It's temporary. It usually doesn't kill fish, but it's still ethical and illegal unless it's a true survival situation. But the fish would float to the top, and you can just scoop them right out. Butternut. Butternut is in the walnut family. Walnut bark and leaves are astringent, and although undocumented, I believe all members of this family can be used similarly. Similarly, um, that walnut family, juglans, we talked about that the week before last. We're talking walnuts, pecans, all the hickory nuts, all of those, and that whole family can also be used as a fish poison. Probably works very similarly. I'm having trouble with that word today with the yucca. All right, ragweed. Ragweed is the cause of allergies in most folks. And I talk about this on a lot under category of allergies because it can also be used to prevent allergies. But this herb is also very astringent and can be used to stop bleeding and as a poultice for insect bites. So ragweed, you know, hated weed by most people, good for allergies, but also good for insect bites, poultice, stop bleeding. And then another category of herbs to stop bleeding are those used in conjunction with applying direct pressure to the wound. Direct pressure is a very effective means of slowing bleeding. Traditionally, many herbs have been used by being bound to wounds to slow bleeding and to absorb blood as it aids coagulation. Okay. The best example of this, remember I said how yarrow was taken into battle by soldiers? Now it can be used internally. It can be used externally as a tear wash. It's all going to help stop bleeding. But if somebody was cut with a sword or shot with a musket ball, and you're talking a big wound there, and just putting some tincture or tea of any herb on there is not going to be as effective as taking a whole big handful of dried yarrow flowers and pressing it on there as a poultice because the yarrow dried flowers themselves will absorb the blood and help with coagulation as the astringent properties of the yarrow start shrinking those capillaries. But another one that's been used, especially by Native Americans, is usnea. Now, this is old man's beard. It's a lichen, and it hangs from limbs of trees. Usnea is particularly good because it is antibiotic, antifungal, and antiviral. Usnea can also be taken internally in tincture form to prevent or help cure infection. Now, when we talk about usnea, we need to make sure we identify it correctly. There's another herb, another lichen, I should say, called wolf lichen, which looks similar, but it's greener in color, and it can be toxic. You want to make sure it is, first of all, the right lichen, and secondly, you don't want to take too much, and only if it's in a plentiful area, because it's one of the main forages that deer and other animals use for the winter. And of course, in any emergency situation or just for our own health, we want a good supply of good, healthy wild meat as well as good, healthy wild herbs. So you can see how much information I pack into just a section on herbs to stop bleeding. So I think each week I'm going to give you a little excerpt from the book, and if you like it, go buy the whole book. I hope you do. It would be wonderful if I could actually make a living at this, wouldn't it? Uh, it's herbal medicine for preppers, homesteaders, and permaculture people. You can get the ebook on my blog, SouthernAppalachianHerbs.blogspot.com, or you can get the corrected and updated print version with the chapter numbers off of Amazon, and they're all for a very reasonable price. compared to most of the other herb books on the market. Mine is about a third of the price, which I'm very proud of, actually. I think part of making herbs available to regular people is not pricing hard-working traditional people out of the market, because a lot of people that fall into that category are trying hard to raise their kids and maybe homeschool them or maybe work a small farm, and they don't have thousands of dollars to go get take an herb class, or 30 or $40 to buy a book that's well, a lot more expensive than it should be, in my opinion. I won't name names, but there are several books I could point out that are in the let's just say 40 to $100 range that I think could probably be sold for 10 or 20, and probably should. But I'm a cheapskate. What do I know? All right, so now we're going to identify one plant this week. And this is one that you're going to see right now. It's fall. It is time to look at the beech family, the Fagaceae. Sorry. It is acorn season. It is bright red and yellow and brown leaf season. This is the time you're going to notice your oaks and your beech trees. Now, Mr. Elpo in Botany a Day says members of the beech family are trees or shrubs, either deciduous or evergreen. The leaves are simple, alternate, and often, but not always, lobed like the oak leaf. The flowers are typically unisexual, both male and female flowers appearing on the same plant. Staminate or male flowers have 4 to 6 sepals, 0 petals, and 4 to 40 stamens. The pistillate female flowers have 4 to 6 sepals and 0 petals. The ovary is positioned inferior and consists of 3, sometimes 6, united carpels forming a single chamber. Usually only one oval is fertilized. It matures into a nut, and that nut is usually attached to a scaly or spiny cap formed of numerous small overlapping bracts. The main ones we see here in North America are the beech tree. Beech is very common where I live, and in fact, folks that taught me herbal medicine when I was starting out lived on Beech Mountain. So, beech leaves are edible, raw or cooked, as a pot herb in early spring. The seeds are rich in oil and high in protein, edible raw or cooked, but should not be eaten in large quantities due to an alkaloid in the outer covering. The seeds may be dried and ground into a flour. The roasted seed is used as a coffee substitute. The sprouted seeds are also edible and reportedly delicious. Yes, they are, actually. Oil from the seeds may be used in cooking and salad dressing, or even as a lamp oil. So the beech tree was very important to early American pioneers. And I think beech nut coffee is actually still on the market. It was once actually made from beech nut. Yeah, beech was once an incredibly important wood, and it's a good word for building as well. The one that is most common by far throughout North America is the oak tree. There are dozens of varieties of oak. There's just about anywhere you go. I mean, if you're on the coast, like in the South, of course, you're going to see live oaks. Um, the angel oak that I actually feature on my book about medicinal uses of trees. I don't even remember, like a 600 or 700 year old oak tree. I mean, it was the first thing. Would have been one of the first things my ancestors saw when they arrived in this country. And it's just an incredible tree with a beautiful history. But as you go through, you're going through the swamps, and you get into the sandhills. You get your blackjack oaks, all your various scrub oaks, water oaks. Keep going, and you get into white oak and red oak and bur oak and post oak. And I mean, just throughout the entire country, there's so many oaks. And all oaks can pretty much be used interchangeably. In fact, all oaks can be used interchangeably. I'll just go ahead and say that. He says the oaks are common across most states, but are rare in Montana where he lives. But they do have the shrub oak and the bur oak planted in many Montana towns. Acorns are edible and highly nutritious, rich in carbohydrates, oil, and protein, but they also contain the astringent tannic acid and some bitters. The tannin content varies widely between species, making some palatable raw and others unpalatable, including Montana's bur oak, even after intensive leaching. The acorns should be cracked open and the nuts removed and then ground into flour. It may be possible to leach whole nuts after shelling, but this would take longer to remove the tannins. The flour can be leached by a couple of methods. It can be placed in a cloth bag and soaked in a stream. The tannic acid will wash out over a period of time. Alternately, the flour can be boiled in several changes of water. Dark water indicates high concentrations of tannin. The water is changed until it remains clear. Another approach is to leave the tannic acid in the acorns, but to neutralize it by adding gelatin, milk, or some other protein to the flour to bind the acid. Now, all I have really ever tried and all I really know about is soaking the tannins out. Most people use the bag and stream method, but recently a lot of people have begun putting bags of acorns, or ground acorns, not whole, in a bag in their toilet tank. And, theoretically, the water that comes into the back of your toilet is clean and it's not dirty until it leaves your toilet. I have some concerns about this sanitarily because I've seen a lot of molds and mildew growing in toilet tanks. Uh, I'm not sure I like that idea. Also, if you're in a city, municipal water can be really nasty, really, really bad. I mean, I know of one town in the Sandhills of North Carolina that people will pay through the nose to live there. It's one of the most expensive places to live in the entire state, and the water is contaminated from an old Monsanto site back when they were making chemical weapons. Yeah, nice, huh? Yeah, back when they were making chemical weapons, it's now a Superfund site, and due to another source of contamination, is actually radioactive. So I would hesitate unless I was on a very clean well with a very clean toilet to use that technique. But a lot of people swear by it, and theoretically, it does make sense. Additionally, oaks are astringent throughout due to the tannin. The bark also contains quercetin, a compound similar to salicin like aspirin. The astringency is used internally for gum inflammation, sore throats, and diarrhea. Externally, it is used for first and second degree burns. The tannins bind proteins and amino acids, sealing off the burns from weeping and from bacterial infections. The leaves can be chewed into a mash for use as an astringent poultice. Oak galls have a high tannin content, as much as 60 to 70% in the galls, plus 2 to 4% of gallic acid. The galls were formerly collected and used as a dye. Well, they're also used in tanning leathers and such. So you can see the oak tree is incredibly medicinal. I consider it equal or superior to the pine tree. All right, y'all. We covered a lot of ground. I want you to have a great week. And, buy my book if you want to. I hope you do. I hope you enjoy it. And go out and enjoy the fall weather. Look for those oak trees. Look for those beech trees if they happen to be in your area. There are so many great recipes for making breads and such from acorns. If you get into that and you come up with a good one, let me know about it. And remember, we get into flu season. Several of the herbs I've mentioned today are very useful, not only for stopping bleeding and such, but for helping with things like really bad sore throats, inflammation that causes you to cough. And be sure to identify the pines and the oaks because a nice hot tea of the inner bark of the pine or the inner bark of the oak or the two combined are one of the very best remedies for a really bad sore throat and a really bad cough. I mean, anything that's really not just a minor head cold, but something that can get serious, and that tissue gets so inflamed that it won't go back down. It can be very dangerous. And the astringent properties of these plants, plus the antiseptic properties, like of the pine, white pine is kind of the one I like to use, and the aspirin-like qualities of the oak really help in a bad cold or a flu, and just not only make it more pleasant, they'll help break a fever, but they can also prevent that inflamed tissue from getting out of control and prevent infection from really setting in, the kind of thing that you would have to, see a doctor for. Uh, but as always, if you need to see a doctor, go see a doctor. We use our home remedies in hopes that we don't have to do that. So, y'all have a great week. I will see you next time.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.